There are some policy debates where there is no clear right or wrong answer, just strong perspectives on both sides. Education policies, especially when it comes to the role of the federal government, is one of those topics. Today, I am breaking down the debates around the U.S. Department of Education, why some want to eliminate it, and why others think it's essential. Let's explore both sides and see if it's something we really need to worry about. Before we go into today's topic, let's talk about what the U.S. Department of Education is. I will give you a simple explanation so you can understand later on. The U.S. Department of Education (ED) was established in 1979 to oversee federal education policies and funding. Its main goal is to support students' achievement and ensure equal access to education across the country. So what does it do? Distributes federal funding. The ED provides financial aid, such as Pell Grants and Title I funding, to support low-income schools and college students, ensures civil rights protections. It enforces law that prevents discrimination based on race, gender, or disability in schools, collects educational data. The department gathers statistics to help policymakers to make informed decisions, manages students' loans. It oversees federal student loan programs and financial aid initiatives. So what's the positive contribution? Well, Title VI protections, promotes gender equality in education and sports, special education supports, ensures students with disabilities receive necessary resources, higher educational aid, helps millions of students afford college through grants and loans. So what are the controversies? Federal overreach. Critics argued it imposes too many regulations, limiting local control. Common core debates. Some believe national education standards are too rigid. Student loan crisis. The rising cost of college and loan debt remains a major issue. So now that we understand the role of the U.S. Department of Education, let's explore the debates on whether it should be restructured or even eliminated. One of the main arguments for reducing the role of U.S. Department of Education is giving more control to states and local governments. The idea is that education should be tailored to regional needs rather than following the standardized national approach. Some believe that federal policies are too rigid and don't account for the differences between states. For example, a rural school in Wyoming may have different needs than an urban school in New York City. Advocates of decentralization argue that giving power back to local districts allows for more flexibility, customized curricula, and policies that best serve local communities. During his presidency, Donald Trump supported this shift, emphasizing vocational training and hands-on career experience rather than strictly following traditional education pathways. His administration aimed to reduce federal oversight, allowing states to determine their own educational priorities. Some conservatives believe that dismantling the Department of Education would benefit the country. The key arguments for this include more local control. States and school districts would have greater autonomy over education policies without federal mandates. Reduced bureaucracy. Removing a federal agency would cut down administrative costs and inefficiencies. Increased school choice. Advocates argue that decentralization allows for greater flexibility in private, charter, and homeschooling options. Tailored education. Schools could design curricula that better reflect regional values and economic needs. Lower federal spending. Eliminating the department's budgets could allow states to allocate funds based on their own priorities. From this perspective, education becomes more of a state's responsibility rather than a federal control system. On the other hand, critics argue that eliminating the Department of Education would have serious negative consequences, such as loss of federal funding. Many schools, particularly in low-income areas, rely on federal grants and programs like Title I, which helps disadvantaged students. Lack of national standards. Without federal oversight, states could set vastly different education standards, leading to disparities in education quality. Less accountability. The Department of Education enforces civil rights protection, ensuring equal access to education for students with disabilities and minority groups. Unequal education systems. Wealthier states might invest more in education, while poorer states could struggle, leading to greater inequality. Impacts on higher education. Federal student loans and Pell Grants, which help millions afford college, are managed by the Department of Education. Without it, access to financial aid could become more complicated. For those who support keeping the departments, the concern is that removing it would create an uneven playing field, making quality education less accessible for many students. One major question is, would eliminating the Department of Education mean there would be no standardized education system in the US? The answer is likely yes. Without a central agency overseeing education, every state would be responsible for its own curriculum, testing, and funding. These could lead to a situation where students in different states receive dramatically different levels of education. For example, one state might emphasize STEM education, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, while another focuses on trade skills. STEM fields are often seen as essential for innovation and economic growth, and many policymakers advocate for their own emphasis in school curriculums. However, others argue that vocational training is just as critical for workforce development, providing hands-on skills necessary for trade professions. Some states might maintain high academic standards, while others might lower them due to budget constraints. While some argue this allows for greater flexibility, others fear it could widen the educational gap across the country. Education policy is often influenced by political beliefs, and there is a perception that supporters of Trump tend to have lower formal education levels. Data from the 2024 election shows that 56% of voters without college degrees supported Trump, while 55% of college graduates voted for Vice President Kamala Harris. Among white voters without a degree, Trump had 66% of votes. However, this doesn't mean that all Trump supporters are uneducated. Voting decisions are complex and influenced by factors such as economic concerns, cultural values, and personal experiences. The idea that one party's voters are smarter than another's is just a divisive oversimplification. You might be wondering why there are people calling Trump supporters uneducated. When I first heard it and kept hearing it, I thought it was pretty rude, but after looking at the statistic, I understood where this perception comes from. However, what's wrong with not pursuing higher education if their job does not require it? Many people are simply hard workers who prefer to gain experience and wisdom through life, and I think that's perfectly fine. It's important to approach these discussions with an open mind and recognize that different perspectives on education stem from deeply held beliefs about government roles, personal responsibility, and economic priorities. From what I've seen in recruitment, a lot of people have degree but end up working in jobs that have nothing to do with what they studied. And this isn't just in the US, it happens everywhere in the world. A degree doesn't always mean you will get a job in that field. Many people thinking getting a degree will automatically open doors, but in reality, employers often care more about real experience than just credentials. I get that education should be flexible depending on the area. Different places have different needs, and that makes sense. But I also think there are some basic things like life skills, responsibilities, and core values that should be the same everywhere. So this really comes down to one big question. What kind of education system do we actually want for the future? Education is powerful. It shapes the kids see the world and think about life. So what do you think is the best way to approach it? If you found this interesting, keep following for more and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video.